Hello, happy Wednesday afternoon. Colin is feeling very animated today.
That's right. That's right. I'm on fire.
Yeah. Today's topic for our weekly live stream is sales and marketing. Now, you might be wondering, aren't you guys finance people? Why are we talking sales and marketing? Are you sales and marketing experts? No, but we are going to talk about the financial mindsets you need to have when you approach your sales and marketing. Because we get questions
Right.
all the time like, do I have the money for this? Can
Yep.
I find the money for this? How do I know if this is a good financial decision? And so that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yep.
Um,
We're going to look at the money and the numbers side. We love the money and numbers side of all parts of business, including sales marketing.
yes, indeed. If you're new here, we do live streams every Wednesday afternoon, 2 p.m. Central or whatever time zone that is for you. And yeah, we're having fun with them. We're still in our first month of doing them, but it's a blast.
That's right.
So, okay, back into sales and marketing. One of the things that we want you to know at the end of this video is how to ring that cash register like a large company. Yeah, do that.
Does that only apply to 18 wheelers or does that also work for cash registers? Maybe they're more like this,
We're
but
like,
yeah, that's right. You get the point.
Yeah, we want that
We
sound.
wanted to use that, the cash register sound from that famous song, but we didn't want to get sued. So we'll just have to do the hand motion instead.
Yeah. So we're going to go over three mindsets that you need to have to ask yourself the right questions when it comes to your sales and marketing. And we'll leave some time for Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, put them in there. We'll see how much time we have at the end. We might only get to one or two. So if we don't get to your question, don't worry. We'll answer it either in the post and respond back to you or save it for next week. So hit us with your questions.
That's right.
But yeah, so like I mentioned before, this is something that we get asked a lot by clients, friends, anyone we know who knows that we have financial mindsets. It's like, all right, so I know I need more clients or customers. I know that. I know I need to spend money on marketing and sales in order to bring in more people, but how do I know how much I can afford?
Yep.
Or they'll come to us and be like, all right, I'm looking at this partner or this new tool that I want. And how do I know if I can afford this? And so this is the experience that we have on our side of, all right, what kind of questions do you need to ask yourself about it? And we help guide
Yeah.
people through that. So that's what we're going to do today.
Yeah. And interestingly, we get asked that question by both sides of the aisle, right? So we get asked by our clients and some of the people that we advise who are trying to figure out, like, can they afford to make this marketing expenditure? Like, what's the right way to look at it? And then we also get asked from, the sales and marketing providers of the world who constantly run into this same challenge. Like they're trying to, get a client, they're trying to get them to see it the way they see it, which is as an investment. And the client's hesitant because the client doesn't really yet feel confident about how to validate the numbers. And so it's a very common pitfall. And, no offense to sales and marketing people or the average business owner, but maybe neither one of them is really that financially minded person. And so it's a little bit of like they're having a conversation and neither of them really know the right way to drive to a solution. So that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. And I know, Colin, you have experience doing these kinds of questions. We're going through it ourselves right now for Finelevate, figuring out our sales and marketing. So we're going to guide you how we approached it. How has it shown up in your businesses before?
Yeah, so we'll talk about the three different mindsets, and just to kind of give a little bit of a preview. I mean, we talk about how to understand what your main channel is, how to not over dabble, how to understand your numbers, and in one of my first businesses, we wanted to get cute and creative, right? It's always fun to think about a strategy, especially when one road requires a lot of work. It's like we always want to believe there's some magic bullet, right? And so, I think that's the trap a lot of entrepreneurs and sales and marketing people, when they're working together, fall into is, are you trying to sell me some magic bullet? Because the reality is this is going to be a long, hard road. Now, a long, hard, fruitful road is worth going down. A long, hard road that leads nowhere, obviously, not a lot of fun. Nobody's signing up for that.
Nope.
So yeah, in my first business, one of the things that we ran into was, we knew we did most of our business in those days by phone. And so we're dealing with people in an airport. They're not necessarily easy to get a hold of. They're not necessarily easy to go see. It wasn't a local business where we could just go out and, hit the road and see everybody. And, this was in the days of, you could send an email, but a lot of them were avoiding emails. It was very hard to create a relationship in a more kind of, generic way like that. And so we tried everything. I mean, we were putting ads in, the magazines for the industry. We were looking at shows. We were, trying to run sales and create promotions. And we were trying to do all these things to get cute and creative. And in reality, when we just started admitting to ourselves that the best way to get a hold of new clients was to track down who they were, where they were, and get them on the phone. And if we could get them on the phone, we could start the relationship. And then the relationship can be sustained through things like email, and once we're more comfortable, text messages, and then eventually grow toward investing the money it takes to go travel and meet the client. But it all started with like figuring out that main channel and saying, okay, like, what are the resources we're going to deploy? Not doing 100 different things, but what are the resources we're going to deploy on the one thing we know works? And we're going to do so much of it that it's undeniable that we're going to get results.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a lot of what we'll talk about today, is again, the financial and the mindsets behind that. But from my experience, that was a big awakening of, what's the right way that we're ultimately going to try and win this game.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the one thing that we want you guys to take away from out of this live stream is that the average small business really approaches their sales and marketing like an amateur. They're like dabbling over here and they don't know exactly what they're doing. The big companies act like pros. And we want to teach you how to approach your sales and marketing like a pro.
Yep. And that sounds harsh, but that's the reality, right? I mean, just because we're in a small business doesn't mean we have to be amateurs. Obviously everybody who's on this live stream, everybody who's in our group, they take a lot of pride in the way they approach business. And as you should. There's a lot of things you've probably figured out, but I don't think any of us would argue that the big companies cannot survive if they haven't figured out how to be a pro and how to monetize their sales and marketing. They know how to invest in sales and marketing. And I feel like that's a huge disconnect with a lot of small businesses, why we stay maybe smaller than we could be or should be.
Yeah. Yeah. So these are the mindsets that'll help you act like a pro. All right. Are we ready to dive in? I'm excited.
Yep.
Mindset number one that we want you to be aware of is know your sales data. Because what we see a lot of times with people that are leading small businesses is that you're like, well, I mean, I understand my customers. I have a pretty good business sense. My gut will tell me what to do. Like this, I know that this messaging would work on me, so it's probably going to work on my ideal customer or client. And you have to challenge that assumption.
Yeah. No, I love that. And one of the things I'll tell people is I almost feel like it's a breakthrough when you can start admitting that you're just trusting your gut. Like there are people who go, well, no, I know what works. We've been doing this for a long time. If you have that conversation with an entrepreneur, and we've talked about this, there can be a lack of comfort in admitting what you don't know. And a lot of times people are earlier in their career, especially, are trying to cover that up by being like, well, no, hey, we know what's going on here. Like this industry's different. We've got this kind of figured out. And it's a beautiful thing when people start saying like, hey, I'm just making a gut call here. Like, I don't really know, because that's the beginning, right? The beginning, all wisdom begins with asking the right questions. So once you admit, I'm just my gut, and I don't know if my gut's right or not, now we're starting to ask some really great questions.
I feel like this is a journey that all small businesses need to go through at some point. Maybe we should do an entire live stream about just using data in your business, because when you first start out, you don't really have data. You got to just have to go with your gut. And it probably got you pretty far, right? So, I mean, it works a lot of the
Yep.
times,
Yep.
but it's not scalable. And especially when it comes to messaging and reaching out to other people, you can't assume that you know what's going to work for them. And so that we see this
Yes.
all the time, even in our own data, where we're like, oh, we're going to test out a couple of different messages, and we're like, oh, that's the one that worked. That's weird. Would
Yeah,
not have guessed.
I'm always so confident on the front end. Like I'm like, oh well, obviously this one's going to be the one with the best
Yeah.
results, and then I'm like, oh wow, yeah, that was the worst results. But yeah, I mean, like you're saying, I think that data is one of the absolute hardest parts of business. And but without it, exactly to your point, not only can you not test your own assumptions, and not only is your business not scalable because you cannot afford to knowingly reinvest in the way that you'd like to, it's also not scalable because you can't delegate gut. Like you can't just say, well, I trust my gut. I just have to find somebody else who trusts their gut. And I also trust their gut. And now we can grow a company. That doesn't work. That's not realistic. You have to figure out a way to run your business on data so that you can then bring on other people who are competent and who also follow data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So, what does this look like in practice? It means that you're split testing your messaging so that you always have options. You'd be like, okay, I think this one is going to do better, but I'm going to throw in another one just to see. And you oftentimes will be surprised.
Yep.
Another piece of data that you should be looking at is knowing every stage of your funnel and seeing where people are falling out of the funnel.
Yep.
Having those numbers will tell you, all right, well, if they're falling out between steps 2 and 3, apparently I need to do something about step 3.
Yep. And again, like a lot of times we talk about split testing, we talk about, funnels, people immediately think we're just talking about an online business, but it's no different. I mean, you could do it with a restaurant or a retail location, or going back to my phone call example. It's like, okay, we can test how many, we can track the data on how many phone calls we're making, how many people we're getting on the line, like how many average calls it takes to get someone on the phone, right? How many conversations we need to have before they're willing to accept a quote, how many quotes we're going to have to do before they're willing to place an order, and then how many follow-ups do we need to do before they place that second order. Whatever you define your funnel as, if you're applying data by tracking what's happening, and this honestly, I mean, if we're being real, this is where we start to talk about pros versus amateurs, because is tracking data like that fun? No, of course it's not. Is your
I
team
mean, it
going to
is
be
for
like,
me, but
yeah,
I'm a data
well,
person.
you're a data nerd. You like looking at it, and maybe you're better than the average person at tracking it as well. But if you go to your team and you say like, "Hey guys, guess what? We're going to track everything we're doing," that's not going to go super well. But the reality is, you need to attract the right pros around you. You need to paint the vision for like, with this information, here's what we'll be able to do. And that's a different thing than just saying, I'm tracking you. We know employees can start to feel like, wait a minute, this is like a big brother tracking system. No, it's not. We're trying to map the funnel. We're trying to figure out our data, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and probably the best piece of data if you're going to start anywhere is to say, where are your customers coming from now? So if you have a new client come on board, where did they first hear about you? If you don't know that
Yep.
answer, start asking.
Yeah.
Because then you can be like, all right, well, this one came from LinkedIn, and this one came from an email, and this one came from my network. And that can tell you what channels you should be focusing on.
Yeah. No, I love that. And again, I'll just say, like, it doesn't, anything you can do with any amount of volume, you can also split test, right? So going back to my phone calls, we could make a phone call, we can make 50 phone calls, and in the first 50 conversations, we could try 3 or 4 different kind of opening lines to explain what we do, and then gauge, like, are they clear on what we said? Do they have a bunch of questions? Do they just sit there stumped on the phone? Like, what are the responses? So it's true in anything we do, right? In selling and anything we've gotten good at in life, we've done trial and error, and split testing is just a modern way of saying trial and error, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And then if you have this data, it allows you to figure out if these channels, these testing things are profitable or not, or are a good decision. Colin, can you
yep.
talk about, we think about it as a required ROI if you're looking at a new possibility.
Yeah, and so we won't get too deep into math today, but the basic idea, we've talked about our profit formula and understanding that, additional marketing spend, one of the beauties of it is if it works, it drives additional revenue, and then your variable costs, like your cost of goods, also go up, but your fixed costs don't have to change. And so what's amazing, if you have a little excess capacity or you're selling something, especially if it's a modern, digital product or something that has a very low cost to deliver, it's a really amazing opportunity to invest in sales and marketing. And so if you're doing $1 million in revenue today and you spend an extra 100,000 on marketing and it allowed you to double your revenue, your second million is going to be a lot more profitable than your first million if you're doing it right. And so that's where
This
like
is all new to you. Go back and watch our live stream on the profit formula.
exactly. Look at the profit formula because we kind of break down more of the math, and we're not going to do math every time because we know people will fall asleep. But the amazing part is like when you start to understand that, people come to us and say like, well, should I spend this additional money? And here's what the marketing people are telling me they would expect to happen in terms of results. Because again, marketing people can tell you some element, but they don't understand the profit levers in your business. So how on earth could they tell you how much more profitable you'll be if they help you add 30% revenue or whatever it is? And so the only way to really know that is have that profit formula and then kind of do some what if scenarios and figure out like, well, what if my worst case scenario happened? I spent this extra money and only got this amount of sales. What would happen? And you can answer all of that. And that's really to get to the heart of the ROI. And I think this is where that big disconnect lives between, people who are trying to decide on sales and marketing and the sales and marketing companies is no one really knows how to look at it in terms of, what'll actually happen on the bottom line.
Yeah. And you should be asking these questions to your sales marketing people. If you have an outside agency, if you have internal people, and they're like, look at all these new sales that we're going to bring in, you should ask them, okay, well, at what point am I breaking even on this spend? And at what point am I being profitable on this spend?
Exactly. Yep.
And if you're looking for specific KPIs,
I think that's
yeah. If you're looking for specific KPIs that you should be measuring, that's like your conversion rate, how many people are converting into a client, your customer acquisition cost, how much are you paying per new client, and your return on ad spend, which is also known as ROAS. Those are the ones that we would recommend that you focus on if this is all new to you and you need to start your measurement somewhere.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
And again, any competent, I just want to point out something you said, which is any competent marketing person is going to speak at least some of this language we're talking about. They may not know like what bottom line impact things are going to have, but they should at least be able to talk about, customer acquisition costs and what a return on ad spend would look like. If they're trying to help you spend your money, they should understand how to help you get return on that spend.
Yeah. So that's a big mindset. Know your data.
Yeah.
Know your data. We're going to move over to mindset number 2, which is figure out your main channel.
Yep.
We see a couple of traps that businesses get into. And the first one being that they're like, well, I need to have a presence everywhere because there's this new app that just came out and it's the up and coming one and I need to be over there. And then I need to be over there. And I need to be on Threads if anyone still uses Threads. Who knows? We call that the dabbler. And so what happens is you are diluting your resources and your energy across so many things that you're never giving one channel enough to make it work.
Yep.
So that's what we call the dabbler. The other trap is that they're like, okay, well, we do this one thing really well. So that's the only thing that we're going to do.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. You want to talk about that?
And typically that one, yeah. So I'll kind of do it backward. Typically the one of the most common things we hear is like, well, that's what we always did. It's a lot of times like we started the business using this one channel. Like we do a referral program or we do, we have some affiliates that we work with who kind of refer business to us. And that's all we've ever done. And so that's all we're ever going to do is kind of the mindset. And then the alternative, like you said, is kind of that, we're just going to sprinkle a little bit of love everywhere and hope that, something works. And the challenge is that, just a tiny amount of resources in any one avenue likely will not break through. It doesn't matter how good the avenue could be, it likely won't work because you're doing just such a bare minimum amount. And so, again, where we said, amateurs versus pros, what's really interesting is, and we can kind of track this through history, we can look at all the most successful companies today and all the companies from 20 or 30 years ago who we thought, were never going to go away. What we see a successful big company do, and they do it all the time, is that they're spending 80 to 90% of their resources in their one main channel. They know with absolute clarity what works today. And going back to our last point, they know the data behind what works today. And so they have it dialed in, like, my customer acquisition through my main channel is this. And then they're diverting the remainder of those resources, and they are always trying to dabble to test if something new is going to catch on. And so it's a combination approach. And let's be real, if we're a small business, it's very hard. I can't dabble in 8 or 9 things, but I can maybe have one main channel and 2 dabbles that I do, whatever those things are. And so it's learning how to do that, because if I take the best 2 things that I can potentially dabble in, and I'm putting enough resources, say 5% of my time and my spend into each of them, and 90% into my main, then I'm going to know if one of those 5% start to show some really significant promise. And, that's how, I mean, think about it. I know a friend of mine growing up, he had a garage door business, and their only form of advertising, they put 100% of their money, their time, their energy into phone books. That was it. Now I'm aging myself a little bit, but I'm going to tell you, it was already laughable, and they were still doing it because it was all they knew. And so if they had been dabbling in the early days of the Google AdWords and understanding back when that was cheap, because remember, part of dabbling is we're testing new platforms, and typically new platforms are very inexpensive relative to the main ones that already have proven themselves. So if they had been dabbling there and seen the spike and the drop off, they would have started to shift those resources. And that's part of why those big companies are always dabbling. Is the main thing today is likely not going to be the main thing in 50 years. So the question is, when between now and 50 years is it going to change?
So going back to what you said was, figure out your main channel. Let that be 80 to 90% of your spend. Always be dabbling the rest of it over here. So that's the balance that we like our clients, our friends to do. How do you determine what that main channel is?
Well, typically, if you're in a more established business, it's the one that's been working, right? And again, sometimes you stick with the main channel while you're developing that future channel. So let's say that you're in that business and you've been, whatever your current version of phone books is, and like, hey, this is working, but it's dying, and I'm having to spend more and more money for less and less results. You should be dabbling in an effort to find what's next. I kind of think of it as like we're jumping from one lily pad to another, right? I'm always keeping an eye out. I know a couple lily pads that are working, that are available, but I need to stay on the one that's currently sustaining me. So by no means would I say don't go into the one that's been working, just take a leap and that's that. But you have to understand, like, if the one I'm in's dying, or if it's just getting so expensive or so filled with competition that it can no longer really sustain what I want to do. But most people know what's working. And for a lot of new businesses, it's my network, my referrals, my friends. Like, I'm reaching out and I'm growing this in the early stages while dabbling to figure out which new main channel I will transition to once that first well runs dry.
Yeah. This is such a good transition to our mindset number 3. So, and that is always be testing.
Yep.
This is such an important mindset to have when you approach your sales and marketing. And it's exactly what you've been saying, that the false belief we see people have is that we're just going to stick with what works. And what happens all the time is what works yesterday may not work tomorrow. And so exactly what Colin is saying, don't let your main channel become obsolete. You'll always have to be having something in the wings. Like, yes, you want your main channel to be the majority of your spend, and that's where the majority of stuff is coming from. Always have something in the wings in case that starts becoming way too expensive. Or we've seen, like the market shifts away from that, like phone books just aren't a thing anymore. That it's nothing that you're doing wrong. It's just, hey, the world has changed. And so always have something available to you that you can then start upping the spend and resources on so that it can take over as a new main channel.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll use a more modern example because our phone book one sounds funny even as we say it. For a lot of people, it's like, okay, I was doing pay per click. Okay. And there was a day where pay per click was pretty much the only game in town. And then Facebook introduces ads, and then LinkedIn's got ads. And now I've got other channels that previously maybe weren't available to me. And so if I know definitively, like, okay, my return on my ad spend for pay per click is this, well, what ends up happening? Just like I said a minute ago, something becomes more established. Pay per click, it keeps costs low. They get it really dominant, and then the prices start to tick up and up and up. And they're looking for that upper threshold, right? They're a business. They know their numbers. They're not dabbling and playing around, right? They know it's working, and they know that they can kind of grind out some additional revenue by keeping those costs really, really high. As that happens, maybe my cost to acquire a customer on Facebook ads used to look more expensive than pay per click, but the numbers start to change. The ads spend goes up on pay per click, and I'm still getting some really good volume, but now my cost and return is off. Yet Facebook is starting to get more volume. It's starting to make more sense. And so I start to divert. And so by no means, if you're in a transition, are we saying you have to be 80% in one camp and then jump to 80% of the other camp? That's not at all what we're saying. When you know the world is changing and you're transitioning your main thing, just look at them as, those levers that are going to kind of change like this. And so as you're diverting spend away from what's been working into the new thing that's working, that's a gradual process.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the other things that you should be testing, like we talked a lot about testing different channels, you should be testing your audiences. Like you might think that, women over 40 are your main audience. I don't know your business, but if that is an example, like women over 40 are your main audience. And then if you're testing, you might realize, oh, actually it's women over 30 now or women over 60 now. And so that can change over time.
Yep.
Always be, again, doing that little bit of dabbling, have your main audience do a little bit of dabbling in a separate audience to see if things are changing. Of course, you should be testing your messaging. That's the one that you should be testing the most.
Yep.
Because that's going to change the quickest. Is what works for messaging is going to change. I mean, week to week sometimes.
Yep.
And so always be having a system for testing your messaging.
Yeah, I love that. And go ahead.
And your content, like messaging and content, even if it's like written word or visuals,
yes.
Testing those all the time.
No, I love that. And this kind of always be testing, and what you were just saying reminds me of a couple things. So in Strategic Coach, one of the things, which I belong in Strategic Coach. And so what that basically is it's an entrepreneur training program. One of the things that's really interesting about Strategic Coach is they talk about like your unique ability. And what they mean by that is like all of us have our own kind of unique gift, let's say. One of the things that's interesting though, is they tell you that when you start exploring unique ability, it gets tighter and tighter over time. It becomes basically closer and closer to that more and more focused. And so the same thing is true of your messaging. The same thing is true of your audience, is that over time you get more and more focused in. You start out thinking like, I'm this, I do this for all these different people and all these different offers. And then over time, the better and better you get is like, I know exactly what I do and where it applies. And we see that in other areas of the business, but I think that also really applies here as we're talking about dialing in your audience. And that's the whole purpose of testing. Like when you were saying, women over 40 or women over 30, at some point you're going to say like, hey, it's, moms between 30 and 42. That's our thing, or whatever it is, right? You get really dialed in because what works the best and resonates the clearest pays the most. Like that's one of the secrets, is that for the right audience at the right time with the right offer, your value is the highest. So when we talked about premium pricing, this all factors back in.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've gone over a lot here with these different mindsets as a summary, as a reminder of what we talked about. First, most important one that leads everything else is know your sales data. Have data, let that guide your way. Second, figure out your
Yes.
main channel. And then very closely is number 3, always be testing. So figure out what's working, but always be testing on the side. Any
Yep.
last comments, Colin, before we go into Q&A?
Well, I just want to remind everybody, I mean, the whole purpose of this, right? We want you ringing that cash register like a pro. So just keep that in mind, that this is what the pros do. They know their numbers and they let the numbers guide their way. They develop a main channel and they just absolutely, full throttle, like pedal to the metal on that main channel while always testing. And the beauty of knowing your numbers is what's happening with your main channel. So the second something else starts to kind of parallel the type of results you can get in your main channel, it's a no-brainer to give more energy into that resource. So just, remember that these are 3 separate mindsets, really one kind of cohesive way to use the numbers to approach your sales and marketing.
Yeah. Awesome. I hope you're hearing the ka-ching in your business. Just have that
I know,
going.
we need that sound. We're going to get that. I know. Next time we're going to just play the song, money, just play it. And it's got the.
Yep. Okay, we're going to transition over to Q&A. I don't think we have time for very many, so we might just get through one. But we've got a question from Dwight. Thank you for your question, Dwight. He says, how can entrepreneurs financially support themselves and their venture, considering options like loans or borrowing from family, and ensure easy repayment and long-term company profitability?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. Dwight's got a really in-depth question. And I know Dwight, and he's a smart guy with a lot of business experience. So I think he's asking a question that's really especially profound when you're in that kind of startup mode or you're a newer business. It's really common. Some of the greatest businesses on this earth, Amazon, started with a family loan, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's really common that people lean on the resources of the people around them when they're in this, exploring entrepreneurship. And I just think, not all businesses are going to become Amazon. In fact, very few, as we know. So there's this kind of mindset that floats out there that I want to debunk. And the mindset, unfortunately, in entrepreneurship, in startups, it gets all the press, which is this kind of Silicon Valley venture capital model. Like I can go as far underwater as I can keep getting a hold of money, because eventually when I come up the other side, I'm this giant, super successful company and everybody thinks I'm brilliant. And the reality is that does not apply in small business. In 99 point, carry the 9 businesses, you need to make money. And so to answer, Dwight's question, the best thing you can do, we kind of talked about when we talked about, the profitability formula in general, you need to make money right now. So let's say I owe friends and family $100,000. Did I make money in the month of February? Did I make money in the month of March? Am I building something that eventually builds toward where I want to be? Or am I just simply going underwater and justifying that because I haven't run out of the cash yet, I'm still on the right path? And the reality is very few businesses require this type of scale necessary to go that far underwater. But because that's the storyline we hear and I'll call them out, like I used to love Inc. magazine. Inc. magazine changed my life. But Inc. magazine now, I guess, gets more readers. It's more clickbaity to talk about, what crazy eye-popping valuation this company that makes no money got. That's not what people need. That magazine used to be great for the day-to-day real frontlines entrepreneur. And now it's like fantasizing about this venture capital Silicon Valley world, but they're telling that storyline to people who need something different. And so that's what I would just recommend everybody kind of keep in mind is if you know, like, hey, I still can't afford to pay this back yet, but I made money this month and I'm on track to make even more money next month and even more money the month after that, you're going to sleep at night. The people who loan you that money are going to sleep at night. Everyone is going to know that this is for a good reason. And if you're just digging that hole deeper and deeper every month, like there is something wrong with the way your business is structured.
It all comes back to profit.
It really does. It really does. And I've said that. I mean, once I fixed profit, I've talked about, the horror stories of my first business and all the different problems it had. I couldn't fix those other problems until I started to make money and started to use making money to stack cash and started using the stacked cash to pay off the debt and get rid of the bad inventory and all the different challenges we had accumulated. They kind of hung on us. But until we were making money, we didn't have a shot at fixing any one of those. Once we had sustained making money, every one of those challenges, we knocked them down one after another after another.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important. Thank you, Dwight, for your question. I think that's all we have time for. But next week, we want to give you a preview. We're going to be talking about people costs and labor costs. And the majority of businesses, that's their biggest expense is people and labor.
Absolutely.
And so that's a big one. And we're going to be excited to talk to you about that next week. So tune in next Wednesday at 2 p.m. for that. And that's all we got.
Yeah, that was good.
There we go. Happy Wednesday afternoon for you. And we will see you again next week.
Yep.
Bye for now.
Bye.